She had the ticket, she had the seat, she had the right to be there. But as the plane's cabin hummed with quiet conversation, a single sentence shattered that calm and revealed just how fragile dignity can be at 35,000 feet. Dr. Maya Ellison, a world-renowned neuroscientist, was told she didn't belong in first class, not because of her ticket, not because of a mistake, but because of the color of her skin. What the crew didn't know was that Maya's father controlled billions in airline contracts, and that one call from him could bring an entire global fleet to a standstill. But here's the question: would she make that call, or would she walk away, leaving the injustice unchallenged? And if she did act, what would it cost her? What would it cost them? And what would it mean for every passenger who's ever been made to feel small? This is not just a story about one seat. It's about power, prejudice, and the moment one woman decided enough was enough. Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the stories that need to be told. It didn't take a bomb threat. It didn't take a cyber attack. Just one quiet phone call at 36,000 feet. That was all it took to freeze 152 flights in midair, wipe $2.1 billion from the market, and bring one of the largest airlines in the world to its knees. And it began here, in the polished, humming departure hall of JFK International, on a brisk Thursday morning, with Dr. Maya Ellison walking toward Gate C-17, rolling a single carry-on bag at her side. Maya moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived in boardrooms and laboratories for most of her adult life. She wasn't dressed to impress anyone, not today. Soft gray travel pants, a cream cashmere sweater, flats that looked understated but were built for walking the endless corridors of airports. Her hair, black with a subtle chestnut hue in the sunlight, was swept into a low bun. No makeup except for a light balm on her lips. She didn't need embellishments. The leather satchel over her shoulder was worn at the edges. Inside were her presentation notes, her research laptop, and a single black fountain pen her father had given her the day she defended her doctoral thesis. She was headed to London to deliver a keynote address at the International Conference on Neurodegenerative Research. Her team's recent work on targeted protein folding had caught the world's attention. If their breakthrough held, it could change how Alzheimer's and Parkinson's were treated for generations. Airports, for Maya, weren't gateways to vacations. They were corridors between world's conference halls, universities, clinical trials. This was just another trip, another chance to share science, to move the work forward. Gate C-17 was already busy with pre-boarding announcements and the constant shuffle of passengers. A faint aroma of coffee hung in the air from the kiosk nearby. The big Aerosky International logo glowed above the gate desk, the silver wings catching the light from the wall of windows. She stepped into the priority boarding lane, pulling out her first-class boarding pass for Flight 407. Seat 20, window. She liked the window. It allowed her to work without the constant stream of people in the aisle. And that's when she noticed it. A flicker. A look. The woman behind the gate counter glanced up from her terminal, her eyes sweeping over Maya's simple travel clothes, her dark skin. A brief pause. Then the faintest curl at the corner of her mouth. The name tag read, Olivia Hayes, lead flight attendant. Mid-40s, blonde bob cut so sharp it could slice paper. Maya had been here before, in 100 subtle ways. The shift in posture, the prolonged glance, the little question that never needed to be spoken aloud. Do you belong here? She stepped forward and handed over her boarding pass. Olivia scanned it, her smile fixed in place but not touching her eyes. Dr. Ellison, she said, pronouncing the title with a curious lilt. There seems to be a problem with your seat. Maya kept her tone even. I confirmed my seat this morning. 2A. Olivia tapped the keyboard with the exaggerated precision of someone demonstrating patience they didn't actually feel. Yes. Well, there have been some last-minute adjustments. The system shows that seat as unavailable. Behind Maya, a man in a tailored navy suit shifted impatiently. She could feel the boarding lane stacking up. Unavailable. Maya asked, Is the aircraft equipment changing? No, nothing like that, Olivia said, eyes still on her screen. But I think we can put you in business class instead. You might actually be more comfortable there. The words were delivered with a velvet softness, but the meaning was steel-edged. Maya's mind filed the moment away with a dozen others over the years, the hotel clerk who double-checked her reservation while waving the couple behind her through, the conference host who assumed she was there to set up catering, the investor who asked whose assistant she was. I prefer to keep the seat I paid for, Maya said quietly. 2A, Peter Lowell, the purser, had stepped up beside Olivia, mid-50s, neatly pressed uniform, the look of a man who avoided conflict unless forced. Dr. Ellison, he said, we're dealing with a reassignment. It happens sometimes. We can offer you a $200 voucher for the inconvenience. A voucher, a downgrade, a public demotion in the aisle, with half the gate area watching. Maya glanced at the boarding pass in Olivia's hand. Was this reassignment random? Peter's smile tightened. We're just trying to keep things moving. The subtext was deafening. The man in the navy suit sighed audibly. A young woman in a hoodie pulled her phone from her pocket, eyes flicking between Maya and the counter. This was a scene now. Maya's instinct was to walk away, let it slide. She had a speech to give in less than 24 hours, and jet lag was not her friend. But something in Olivia's tone, in Peter's half-smile, told her this wasn't just about logistics. It was about gatekeeping in its oldest, ugliest form. She inhaled slowly, feeling her pulse steady. I'll take my original seat. Thank you. Olivia's expression sharpened, the smile evaporating. Dr. Ellison, I'm afraid that won't be possible. Business class or a later flight? That's all we can offer. Maya looked past them to the jet bridge, the open door of the aircraft just visible at the far end. The space she'd already paid to occupy was sitting there, empty, waiting. She gave a single nod, not to agree, but to mark the moment. Understood. She took the boarding pass Olivia handed back, now printed for seat 9D in business class. She stepped aside, letting the man in the navy suit stride past. In the quieter corner of the gate area, she lowered herself into an empty chair by the window. Outside, the sleek white body of Flight 407 gleamed in the morning sun, the Aerosky tail fin bright against the blue. She reached into her satchel and pulled out her phone. The list of contacts was short. Family, a few close friends, colleagues who were more like family, and one entry simply labeled Father. Her thumb hovered over it for a moment. Then she pressed call. The call rang twice before the line clicked open. Maya! Her father's voice came through, low and steady, the kind of tone that could quiet a room full of executives. She didn't answer right away. She was still looking at the nose of the aircraft through the glass, watching the sunlight slide across its painted surface. Passengers streamed past the window, boarding in steady waves. Are you all right? He asked. Maya exhaled through her nose, controlling the pace of her breath. I'm fine. I'll call you later. She hung up before he could press further. Not yet. She needed to be sure of the shape of what had just happened. The boarding announcement for business class echoed across the gate area. Her row was called. Maya rose, smoothing her sweater, adjusting the strap of her satchel. As she walked down the jet bridge, the hum of the air conditioning surrounded her. She stepped onto the aircraft, greeted by Peter Lowell. His smile was professional, but tight. Olivia Hayes stood just behind him, managing the boarding flow with brisk gestures. Neither woman nor man made any move to meet Maya's eyes. "This way," Peter said, gesturing toward the business-class cabin. Row 9D, a wide seat, angled toward the window, a blanket folded neatly on the armrest. It was comfortable. It was also a public statement that she had been moved. A man across the aisle glanced at her, recognition flickering in his gaze. He had been in the boarding line, had watched the exchange at the gate. His eyes lingered a moment too long before he turned away. Maya stored her satchel in the overhead bin and settled into the seat. The noise of passengers stowing bags and clicking seatbelts surrounded her. The faint scent of brewed coffee drifted from the galley. She reached into the satchel and pulled out her laptop, opening it to the half-finished slides of her keynote presentation. Lines of data and colorful protein models filled the screen. But her mind was still at Gate C-17. She remembered the exact inflection in Olivia's voice, the way Peter had said keep things moving as if she were an obstacle, the subtle satisfaction in handing her a new boarding pass. None of it was overt. All of it was undeniable. She thought back to graduate school, when a visiting professor had assumed she was a lab assistant instead of the lead on a grant. To the first time she presented at an international conference, and a fellow scientist had asked if her real supervisor would be arriving. Every time it had been couched in politeness, wrapped in plausible excuses. And every time she had swallowed the sting, redirected her energy into the work. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as more passengers filed in. Maya glanced up to see a middle-aged white couple walking past toward first class. They were chatting easily with Olivia, who laughed and touched the woman's arm as she guided them forward. Maya's jaw tightened. She turned back to her laptop, fingers hovering over the keys, but the words refused to form. The seat felt smaller than it was, the air heavier. The captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and professional. "Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Elise Moreno speaking. Welcome aboard Aerosky Flight 407 service to London Heathrow." Maya barely heard the rest. She was focused on the slow burn in her chest. It wasn't rage exactly. It was something colder, something sharper. She closed the laptop and placed it gently in the seat pocket. Her hand went to her phone again. She scrolled to Father and let her thumb hover there. The seat next to her remained empty. Business class was only half full. The hum of boarding slowed. She could hear the murmur of voices from first class just beyond the curtain, a small world separated by a thin piece of fabric. She remembered the look Olivia had given her at the gate, not curiosity, not concern, ownership, the quiet assumption that she had the authority to decide who belonged where. Maya pressed call. Her father's voice again, this time with an edge of alertness. "Maya, they moved me," she said simply, "from 2A to business class. No mechanical change, no overbooking, just moved." There was a pause on the line, a silence that felt like the space before a storm breaks. "What were their names?" he asked. "Olivia Hayes, Peter Lowell, and the flight is 407 to London." "I understand," he said. She could hear the sound of him setting something down, the faint click of a pen. "I'll take it from here." She hesitated. "I don't want a scene." "You won't have a scene," he said. "You'll have a resolution." She could picture him now in that glass-walled corner office, the Manhattan skyline behind him, his mind already moving through possibilities like a grandmaster in the middle of a chess game. "Enjoy the flight," he said softly, "and keep your seatbelt fastened." The line went dead. Maya set the phone down on the armrest. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The low rumble of the engine starting vibrated through the cabin floor. She opened them again to see Olivia moving down the aisle toward her. "Dr. Ellison," Olivia said, stopping at her row. Her voice was courteous, but the corners of her mouth were tight. "If there's anything we can do to make you more comfortable." Maya looked at her for a long moment. "You could have left me in my seat." Olivia's eyes flickered, just for a second, before she smiled again. "Enjoy your flight," she said, and walked away. The curtain of first class swayed slightly as she passed through, closing the space between the cabins once more. Maya turned her gaze back to the window. The aircraft began to push back from the gate. The terminal slowly receded, the ground crew moving like small figures in a play. She could feel the shift in momentum as the plane turned toward the taxiway. The seat felt exactly the same as it had 10 minutes ago. And yet, it wasn't. She knew, in the quiet center of her mind, that the decision to call her father had set something in motion. What, exactly? She didn't yet know. But she understood one thing completely. This was no longer about comfort. It was about something far larger than a seat number. The engines roared. The plane began its roll toward takeoff. And somewhere in the distance far from this cabin, the first domino was already beginning to fall. The nose of the aircraft tilted upward, and the pressure pressed gently against Maya's chest. She closed her eyes, letting the sound of the engines fill the space where conversation had been. The plane climbed through a layer of low cloud, and for a moment the cabin was awash in bright, white light. She adjusted her seat slightly, feeling the hum of the climb beneath her feet. The business class cabin was quiet now, passengers settling into books, screens, or silence. Maya kept her gaze on the seatbelt clasp resting against her lap, fingers lightly tracing the cool metal. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. Her phone was still on the armrest, screen dark. The last call to her father logged and waiting in the background, like a sealed envelope. She picked it up again, almost without thinking, and scrolled to his name. She didn't need to press call this time. It vibrated in her hand before she could. She answered, "Maya." Charles Ellison's voice came through, not raised, not hurried, but focused in a way she had heard only in moments of high consequence. "They moved me," she said simply. He didn't respond right away. She could hear the faint sounds of his office, the distant whir of the air purifier, the low murmur of traffic far below his Manhattan skyscraper. "Tell me everything," he said at last. Maya recounted it exactly as it had happened. The boarding lane. Olivia Hayes's smile that didn't reach her eyes. Peter Lowell's polite but immovable tone. The offer of a voucher, as though her seat were an inconvenience to the airline rather than an agreement paid in full. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. When she finished, there was a silence on the line. Then Charles asked, "What's the flight number?" 407, JFK to Heathrow. And the names Olivia Hayes, Peter Lowell. The captain introduced herself as Elise Moreno. Charles made a faint sound, not surprise, not anger, but a low acknowledgement. Maya knew that sound. It meant he had begun moving pieces in his mind. "I'll handle it," he said. She hesitated. "I'm not asking for a spectacle. I don't want them making an announcement mid-flight or apologizing over the PA." "You won't get a spectacle," he said. You'll get resolution, quietly. She knew better than to ask for details. Her father's world was a network of contracts, leverage points, and obligations balanced on fine threads. When he decided to pull one, the effects could be immediate and far-reaching. "I'll call you when you land," he added. Maya ended the call and slid the phone back into her satchel. She adjusted her seat and tried to open her laptop again, but the words on the slides blurred. Her mind replayed the last 30 minutes, each interaction with Olivia and Peter looping like a scene she could not quite edit away. Somewhere near the front of the aircraft, she could hear the clink of glassware and the muted murmur of first-class passengers ordering drinks. She wasn't sure whether the sound fueled her irritation or simply anchored it. Far above the Atlantic, in a different kind of cockpit, the 88th floor of Ellison Global Holdings, Charles Ellison stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his phone still in his hand. Manhattan stretched out below him, a living map of glass and steel. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Get Marcus Fielding, now." Within moments, the line clicked. "Marcus here. We're invoking Section 14.3 of the Aerosky Long-Haul Lease Agreement," Charles said without preamble. On the other end, Marcus paused. "That's significant. What's the trigger material breach? Failure of corporate governance. Public disrepute." "I see," Marcus said slowly. He knew better than to ask for gossip. "Do you want me to prepare the notice first, or prepare it, issue it, then call the operations division? Every aircraft we lease to them is to be grounded upon landing, effective immediately. Their access to our Horizon Nav software is to be suspended in 90 minutes. Marcus exhaled softly. "That will paralyze them. That's the point." Charles ended the call without another word. He moved to his computer, bringing up the portfolio dashboard. Aerosky International was there, one of dozens of assets, but unique in its dependence on Ellison Global. 60% of its long-haul fleet carried Ellison-owned tail numbers under lease agreements. Every one of those aircraft relied on Horizon Nav Ellison's proprietary logistics software to coordinate flight crew scheduling, gate assignments, fuel loads, maintenance cycles. Without it, Aerosky would revert to manual processes from decades past. In modern aviation, that was the equivalent of shutting down its central nervous system. Back on Flight 407, Maya reached for the small bottle of water at her seat and took a sip. She tried to focus on the slow rhythm of her breathing, to let the cabin's muted hum smooth the jagged edges of her thoughts. She didn't know exactly what her father was doing. She didn't need to. But she understood the principle. There were moments in life when you let something go. And there were moments when you used what you had to make sure it didn't happen again to you, or to anyone else who came after. An hour into the flight, Captain Moreno's voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been advised of some operational adjustments across the network. Your comfort and safety remain our priority, and we appreciate your patience." Maya looked out the window. The Atlantic below was a sheet of deep blue, streaked with whitecaps. From up here, borders meant nothing. Lines were human inventions, drawn and erased as power shifted. She wondered what lines might be redrawn before this flight touched down. In Aerosky's operations center in Dallas, a cavernous room lined with wall-to-wall monitors. A controller frowned at his screen. "Why is Horizon Nav timing out?" he called across the room. Another controller shook his head, typing quickly. "It's not just you. I can't pull crew rosters for the evening bank." Within minutes, the murmurs became shouts. Flight icons on the central map began changing from green to amber, then amber to red. The head of operations strode in and headset on, barking into his mic. Call Horizon Nav support now. The reply came back almost instantly. Support line's down. It's rerouting to a legal office. He stopped in his tracks. That's not a glitch, he said. That's Ellison, far above, oblivious to the specific mechanics, but aware of the inevitability. Maya closed her eyes again and let the steady vibration of the engines fill her ears. Somewhere, a storm was building. She could feel the pressure drop even in this pressurized cabin, and she knew when her father moved this quietly. The turbulence always came later. Charles Ellison stood in the middle of his office, one hand resting on the cool steel edge of his desk. From the 88th floor, the city looked deceptively calm, the morning light pouring across rooftops and bridges. But inside the quiet of his glass-walled space, something had already begun moving. He pressed another button on his phone. Operations. Connect me with Priya in Fleet Management. A crisp voice answered within seconds. Mr. Ellison, prepare a recall notice for all long-haul assets leased to Aerosky International. If they are in the air, they land and stay where they are. If they are on the ground, they remain there. No exceptions. Yes, sir. That will cause I am aware. Do it. He ended the call and turned back to his computer. The contract for Aerosky's fleet was already open, a carefully crafted legal masterpiece he had overseen himself years ago. The clauses were designed for protection, leverage, and precision strikes. Section 14. Point 3 allowed for immediate termination in the event of reputational damage that could affect the value of Ellison Global's assets. It was rarely used, but when it was, there was no mistaking the message. He typed a brief email to Marcus Fielding. It was a single-line execute, half a world away. A British Airbus A350 leased by Ellison Global was preparing for pushback in Hong Kong. The crew was halfway through safety checks when the gate agent returned with instructions to hold position. No explanation, just hold. In Paris, a flight bound for Chicago had already boarded. Passengers were settling in when the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but firm, announcing a delay due to a technical systems issue. In Dubai, a crew slated to operate a New York flight received a notice that their assignments were suspended pending verification. The Horizon Nav system had flagged their certifications as invalid. The crew stared at each other, confused. Back in Dallas, the Aerosky Integrated Operations Center began to feel the first tremors. Dozens of small alerts lit up across the massive wall of monitors. Most were minor, the sort of glitches that happened every week. But then the alerts multiplied, climbing from dozens to hundreds. Why can't I pull the load sheet for Flight 208? A controller called out. Mine's frozen too, someone else replied. The head of IT stepped in from the side hallway, eyes locked on his tablet. We're being locked out of Horizon of... The room stilled for half a beat. Horizon Nav wasn't just software. It was the brain of the airline. Without it, crew assignments, fuel calculations, gate changes, and maintenance records couldn't be processed. Get Horizon Nav on the line. The operations manager barked. A minute later, his headset crackled. They're not taking calls. We're being rerouted to a law office in Manhattan. He ripped the headset off. This isn't a malfunction. This is Ellison. At that exact moment, Thomas Rourke, CEO of Aerosky, was finishing a breakfast meeting with investors in a midtown hotel. His phone buzzed twice, then again. He glanced at the screen, saw the COO's name, and stepped into the hallway. Jared, he said. It's bad. Jared Blake replied, We've lost Horizon Nav access. All leased aircraft from Ellison are being grounded on landing, And Marcus Fielding just served us a notice of default. That's impossible, Rourke said. What's the alleged breach public disrepute and catastrophic governance failure? Rourke's mind raced. This is over one of their planes. There hasn't been. There's chatter online. Jared interrupted. Something about a passenger being downgraded. Black. Scientist. The name floating around is Maya Ellison. The name hit Rourke like a sudden drop in altitude. Ellison, he repeated, almost to himself. Yes, Jared said. His daughter. The hallway seemed to tilt around Rourke. The air felt thin. He turned toward the lobby windows, the city sprawling beneath a winter haze. Call legal, he said, voice clipped. Tell them to hold all statements. I'm heading to the office. While Rourke was making his way through traffic, Marcus Fielding was in a secure conference room at Ellison Global, a small army of attorneys around him. They were drafting the public notice that would accompany the operational freeze. The language was sharp but surgical, designed to meet every contractual requirement while delivering maximum corporate shock. Back in the sky, Flight 407 was a quiet island above the chaos. Maya sipped her water, unaware of the exact scale of what her father had set in motion, but certain that it was not small, in first class. Olivia Hayes poured champagne for a passenger in 1C, her smile professional, but a shade tighter than before. She had been receiving intermittent updates from the crew chat, nothing detailed, just a sense that operations was dealing with a serious issue. Peter Lowell avoided her eye when they crossed paths in the galley. Maya leaned her head back, closing her eyes for a moment. She had learned long ago that the most decisive actions often happened in silence, far away from where the problem started, somewhere on the ground. Her father's voice would be steady, his instructions precise, his network already moving. In the Dallas Operations Center, the red markers on the map multiplied again. Flights over the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans were now flagged. Airports in Frankfurt, Singapore, Los Angeles, and Johannesburg reported holding patterns and gate shortages as planes under Ellison lease remained locked out of arrival systems. A vice president of operations turned to the manager on duty. This is global. If we don't get back into Horizon Nav in the next hour, we'll have to start canceling en masse. You think Ellison cares? The manager said. He's making a point. In Manhattan. Charles Ellison glanced at the clock on his desk. It had been just under an hour since Maya's call. He picked up the phone again and dialed Marcus. How's our timing? Charles asked. The gridlock will hit peak in 30 minutes. Marcus replied. We'll have half their network grounded by then. Charles allowed himself a single nod. Good. Once it peaks, let Rourke come to us. No sooner. Back on Flight 407, the seatbelt sign pinged off. Passengers began to move about, stretching their legs, adjusting to the long hours ahead. Maya kept her seat, her gaze drifting to the horizon through the oval window. The sunlight was soft here, filtered by the thin atmosphere, and the clouds below stretched on forever. She thought about her father's voice, the weight of it when he said, "You'll have a resolution." She had grown up watching him navigate crises that would have broken other people. He had taught her that power was not about volume or spectacle. It was about precision. It was about removing one piece from a system and letting the whole structure feel its absence. Somewhere beneath them, airports were slowing. Flights were idling on taxiways. Schedules were unraveling. And in every one of those places, someone would be asking, what could cause this? The answer was simple. One phone call. The Aerosky Integrated Operations Center in Dallas had been built like a command post for a small country, It was vast, windowless, lit in cool blues and whites, and lined with tiered rows of workstations facing a wall of screens that stretched 2 stories high. From here, hundreds of flights across the globe were tracked, coordinated, and kept in perfect rhythm. But that rhythm had begun to unravel. It started in murmurs at the back row, where the tech team sat. 2 controllers exchanged confused glances when their screens froze on load calculations for a flight bound for Los Angeles. One tried again, only to watch the system flash an error message he had never seen before. Access revoked. Contact administrator. By the time he leaned over to speak to his supervisor, the same message was appearing on other screens across the floor. "Why is Horizon Nav down?" someone called. "It's not down," another voice said. "We're locked out." The shift manager strode toward the center aisle, scanning the displays on either side. The massive map on the front wall, dotted with hundreds of green aircraft icons, was beginning to change. One by one, the icons flickered yellow, then red. The legend at the bottom explained the colors: green for active and on time, yellow for delayed, red for grounded or inoperative. A ripple of tension moved through the room. "Get a hold of Horizon Nav Tech Support now," the shift manager ordered. A controller dialed the secure line, waited, and then frowned. "It's redirecting to a law firm in Manhattan." That stopped everyone within earshot. There was only one reason Horizon Nav would direct an airline to a law office instead of its own tech department. It meant the lockout was deliberate. "This is Ellison," the shift manager said grimly. Within minutes, the scale of the crisis became undeniable. Fueling requests for dozens of departures were being denied because weight and balance calculations could not be processed. Gates for arriving flights could not be assigned. Crew schedules for the next rotation disappeared from the system entirely, replaced by blank screens. Controllers scrambled for workarounds, but the airline was too big, too interconnected, to operate without its digital nerve center. In Frankfurt, an Aerosky 787 landed from Johannesburg and sat idle on the taxiway because there was no gate assignment in the system. The passengers inside were told there would be a short delay, but the minutes dragged into an hour. The captain paced the cockpit, headset pressed to his ear, hearing nothing but apologies from ground control. In Singapore, a flight to New York was boarded and ready to push back when the dispatcher informed the crew they had no valid fuel order on record. The flight crew, baffled, waited for instructions that never came. In Los Angeles, a bank of connecting flights to Asia was canceled outright when the crews were marked as uncertified in Horizon Nav. By noon, Eastern Time, over 100 flights had been canceled or grounded. Tens of thousands of passengers were stranded in terminals around the world, queuing at customer service desks where the lines snaked so far they merged with one another. Screens above the gates flipped from on time to canceled in a relentless cascade. In the Dallas Operations Center, the pressure mounted by the second. "How much of the network is affected?" a senior vice president demanded. "Everything that touches Ellison-leased aircraft," came the reply. "And that's more than half our long-haul fleet." The vice president turned to the COO on the secure video link. "Jared, we can't operate like this. We need to get them back on the line." Jared Blake rubbed his forehead, his eyes hollow from the morning's chaos. "We're trying. Rourke's on his way to Manhattan now. In the middle of this." Flight 407 cruised steadily at 36,000 feet. Maya sat in her seat, watching a pale blue horizon stretch endlessly through the oval window. The chaos unfolding thousands of feet below hadn't yet touched the calm bubble of the cabin. But there were hints. Service was slower. The crew seemed distracted. Olivia Hayes passed through business class twice, speaking in low tones to Peter Lowell, glancing toward the front galley as though expecting news. Maya watched quietly, saying nothing. She could see the tension in their movements, the way Olivia's hand lingered on the seatbacks for a fraction longer than before. In first class, the chatter among passengers had shifted. A man's voice carried through the curtain, complaining about a canceled connection. Another asked if the airline was under cyber attack. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, picturing her father in his office, leaning back in that leather chair, waiting for the exact moment to make his next move. She had seen it before, in business disputes, in negotiations that seemed impossible until he shifted a single condition and the entire game changed. The aircraft sailed on, crossing invisible lines in the sky, the Atlantic far below, dotted with faint white trails where ships moved slowly beneath the clouds. In Dallas, the operations map was now bleeding red. The only green icons remaining were a handful of short-haul flights using aircraft not tied to Ellison leases. Even those were at risk of delay because the crews, gates, and maintenance records were still tied to the lock system. The head of operations slammed his palm on the desk. "We can't function without Horizon Nav. We're grounded." Jared's voice came through the video link. "Then tell the board we're grounded, and tell Rourke to fix it." Across the country in New York, Thomas Rourke's car pulled into the curb of the Ellison Global Tower. The driver opened his door, and he stepped out into a swirl of cold wind. He looked up at the building, all dark glass and steel, like a monolith rising out of the city. He knew what waited for him inside was not a negotiation. It was an audience. Back on Flight 407, the captain's voice broke into the cabin again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting a smooth ride across the Atlantic today. We appreciate your patience as we manage a few network adjustments." Maya let the words settle. Network adjustments. That was the polite phrase for whatever was happening below. She imagined the terminals filled with stranded passengers, the departure boards filled with red letters, the phone lines jammed with calls from people demanding answers. She reached for her water again, took a slow sip, and returned her gaze to the endless blue outside. Somewhere between here and London, the center of gravity had shifted. She wasn't in her original seat. She wasn't even in the right cabin, but the balance of power was no longer in the hands of the people who had put her there. Far below, the system was collapsing, and the person holding the switch was her father. Thomas Rourke stepped into the marble lobby of Ellison Global with the look of a man walking into court without counsel. He adjusted his scarf against the winter draft that followed him in and moved toward the reception desk. Two security officers in dark suits intercepted him. "Mr. Rourke," one said politely. "Mr. Ellison will see you shortly. Please follow us." There was no invitation to sit, no request for coffee. They escorted him directly to a private elevator. The doors closed, and the car ascended in near silence, except for the muted hum of machinery. Rourke's phone vibrated in his coat pocket. He took it out. The screen was a flood of notifications from Jared Blake, the COO, missed calls, urgent texts. He opened the most recent one. It read, "We have a problem. Social media is on fire." Rourke typed back quickly. "What now?" The reply came before the elevator reached the 88th floor. Passenger on Flight 407 says she was removed from first class. Black scientist. Video is circulating. His thumb hovered over the screen. The elevator chimed. The doors opened onto a quiet hallway of dark wooden glass. At the far end, double doors stood open, revealing the expanse of Charles Ellison's office. Inside, The room was flooded with daylight from floor-to-ceiling windows. Charles stood by the view, hands clasped behind his back. "Thomas?" he said without turning. "Charles," Rourke replied, "stepping in. I came as soon as you grounded my planes." Charles interrupted. His voice was not raised, yet it carried an unmistakable weight. Rourke opened his mouth to protest but stopped. "We can fix this." Whatever the misunderstanding was, there was no misunderstanding, Charles said. He finally turned, his expression calm but unyielding. "Your employees made a choice. They exercised prejudice in my cabin against my daughter." Rourke's face tightened. "I wasn't aware." "That," Charles said, "is part of the problem." Before Rourke could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time Jared's voice came through, low and tense. "It's trending worldwide. #AeroSkyBias. People are sharing the passenger's name." Rourke's throat went dry. "Who is it?" "You already know," Jared said. "Maya Ellison, in the office." Rourke slowly lowered the phone. He met Charles's eyes, reading the confirmation there. "I didn't know she was on board," Rourke said. "It shouldn't matter who she is." Charles replied, "It should matter that she paid for her seat and your people decided she didn't belong there." The words landed like a verdict. Rourke had spent years maneuvering through corporate crises, but this was different. This was personal for a man who could erase entire divisions from the market without a ripple touching him. On Flight 407, the news was beginning to leak into the cabin in fragments. A passenger in business class scrolled through their phone and whispered to the person beside them. Another leaned into the aisle to glance at a neighbor's screen. Maya noticed the shift in atmosphere. It wasn't loud, but it was tangible. Eyes glanced in her direction and then away again. She could feel the quiet undercurrent of curiosity. A man across the aisle tapped the arm of his seatmate and tilted his phone. The headline was large enough for Maya to catch Aerosky under fire after passenger claims racial bias. Below it was a grainy photo taken at the gate that morning. Her own profile, caught mid-sentence. She inhaled slowly and looked back toward the front of the cabin. Olivia Hayes was speaking with Peter Lowell again, her shoulders rigid. In Dallas. The Aerosky communications team was already drafting a statement. The head of PR wiped her eyes with the back of her hand after 3 straight hours of damage control. "We can't get ahead of it," she told Jared. "The story is everywhere. People are digging up other complaints, other incidents. It's snowballing. In Frankfurt, stranded passengers were filming videos of themselves in terminal chairs, explaining that Aerosky couldn't get them on new flights. Many were linking their frustration to the headline spreading online. The pieces were converging. What had begun as a private humiliation at Gate C-17 was now a public reckoning with footage, eyewitness accounts, and the kind of narrative that fed itself faster than any official statement could contain. In the office, high above Manhattan, Charles moved to his desk and opened a leather-bound folder. Inside were several printed pages, copies of the contract clauses Marcus had cited that morning. He slid them across to Rourke. "You are in breach," Charles said, "and you will correct it publicly and structurally." Rourke looked down at the papers but didn't reach for them. "What do you want?" "You'll know soon enough," Charles said. "For now, go back to your office. Speak to no one outside your inner circle. This is already larger than you realize." Rourke wanted to push back, to insist that his company could withstand whatever storm Charles intended to create. But even as the thought formed, he knew it was hollow. The operational freeze was only a visible symptom. The real damage was happening in the silent collapse of investor confidence and the growing anger of tens of thousands of stranded customers. He left the office with the same 2 security officers who had brought him in. The elevator doors closed behind him, sealing Charles Ellison in his high vantage point. Back on the aircraft, Maya kept her gaze on the slow drift of clouds beneath them. She had not looked at her phone since speaking with her father, but she could feel the vibration of incoming messages through the satchel at her feet. She imagined what they might say. She chose not to know just yet. In the first-class galley, Olivia picked up the interphone and called the flight deck. "Captain, are we diverting?" Captain Moreno's voice came back calm. "No diversions. Continue service." Olivia replaced the handset and took a moment before re-entering the cabin. She was aware that something was unfolding far beyond the fuselage of this aircraft, but she didn't yet know her own role in it had already been named. The seatbelt sign illuminated as the aircraft entered light turbulence. The small jolt sent a ripple through the passengers, and for a moment all eyes shifted back to their own spaces, their own thoughts. But the world outside the window was already shifting. The next time this plane touched down, nothing about Aerosky or about the names tied to this flight would be the same. The steady hum of the engines had taken on a strange quality. It was no louder than before, but it carried an edge, like the faint vibration of a string pulled too tight. Maya felt it in her chest more than in her ears. She had kept to herself since the service break, quietly observing the shifting atmosphere in the cabin. It was in the way people's eyes lingered on her, in the abrupt stops to whispered conversations when she turned her head. Whatever was happening beyond the fuselage had begun to filter inside. A man in business class leaned forward over the aisle, showing something on his phone to a woman across from him. Maya caught a glimpse of the headline, "Aerosky Crisis Deepens." Below it was a still image her, standing at the gate that morning, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch, but she did look away, not because she was afraid of being seen, but because she had learned long ago that the weight of a gaze could be deflected simply by not meeting it. Peter Lowell appeared at her seat, his voice pitched low. "Dr. Ellison, the captain would like a word with you." Maya raised her eyes to him, measuring his tone. There was no hostility, only the kind of tension that came from someone carrying a message they didn't fully understand. She nodded, unbuckled her belt, and followed him toward the forward galley. Captain Elise Moreno stood just inside the flight deck doorway. She was composed, her uniform crisp, her eyes steady. She gestured for Maya to step closer, then glanced at Peter, who took the hint and moved a few steps back. "Dr. Ellison," Moreno began, "I wanted to speak with you personally. I understand there was an issue before boarding. I also understand that you're now aware of developments since we departed." Maya tilted her head slightly. "Developments." Moreno's gaze flicked toward the curtains separating the cabin from the galley. "Our operations center has been in contact. I'm told there are significant disruptions across the network. It appears your father may be involved." Maya didn't confirm or deny it, and Moreno drew a slow breath. "And I wanted to assure you that you are welcome in this cabin. You always were. What happened at the gate was unacceptable. I can't undo it. But I can tell you that this crew will treat you with the respect you deserve for the remainder of this flight." Maya studied her for a moment. "Respect should not be conditional on who my father is," she said softly. The captain's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "You're right. It should not." There was a long pause, the kind that carried more weight than raised voices. Maya finally nodded. "Then let's get everyone to London safely." She returned to her seat without ceremony. A few heads turned as she passed, but she ignored them. She settled in, adjusted her belt, and fixed her gaze once again on the thin line of the horizon outside her window, in the rear galley. Olivia Hayes leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. She had found the trending hashtag and the clips that were spreading across every platform. The one from the gate was the most damning. Her voice could be heard, faint but clear enough to catch the dismissive tone when she told Maya that her seat was no longer available. Her stomach knotted as she realized there was no way to spin it. The clip was out there, paired with other passengers' accounts of the incident, and the name Ellison was now attached to all of it. She put her phone down, staring at the metal counter in front of her. The hum of the engines felt louder here, closer to the skin. In Dallas. Jared Blake stood in the center of the operations floor, surrounded by screens full of red-coated flights. He had just hung up with the head of PR when his assistant handed him a tablet. "CNN is running it now," she said. "On the screen." A split image showed the operational map of Aerosky's grounded fleet on one side and Maya's face from the gate video on the other. The chyron read "Billionaire's daughter removed from first class sparks global airline meltdown." Jared exhaled sharply. "This is no longer just operational. It's political. Get me the State Department." Meanwhile, in the Ellison Global Tower, Charles watched the same coverage from his office. His phone rang, the secure line. He picked it up without looking away from the screen. "She's fine," he said into the receiver. "I've spoken to her. We stay the course." The voice on the other end hesitated, and if Rourke calls Charles's lips curved into the faintest smile, he will, but not until he understands the cost. Back on Flight 407, the meal service had begun, though the pacing was uneven. Maya accepted a tray without comment. The food was warm, the cutlery metal, the presentation almost elegant, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She thought about the way Olivia had looked at her at the gate, not with open contempt, but with that practiced detachment that came from believing certain people did not belong in certain spaces. She thought about the years she had spent navigating rooms where she was the only black woman, the silent calculations she made every time she stepped into a board meeting or a conference, and she thought about her father, sitting in that high-glass office, moving entire fleets with a phone call, not because she was helpless, but because he refused to let the architecture of prejudice stand unchallenged. The hum of the engines shifted again, a subtle change in pitch as the aircraft adjusted course slightly. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing favorable winds and an early arrival. Maya looked down at her untouched meal. Early arrival, as though the ground would be any more stable when they landed. She set the tray aside, leaned back, and closed her eyes. The noise of the cabin softened, replaced in her mind by the memory of her father's voice from that morning calm. Measured, absolute. "You'll have a resolution." The Atlantic stretched endlessly below, but the tension inside Flight 407 was closing in like a shrinking room. It began subtly. A few passengers had their seatback screens switched from movies to live news feeds. On those screens, headlines pulsed across banners in bright red Aerosky and freefall. Beneath them were images of crowded terminals, passengers sleeping on the floor, and departure boards filled with cancellations. Maya noticed a middle-aged man in the aisle seat ahead of her tilt his head toward a woman across the way. "It's global," he said in a low voice. "They're saying one person's holding the system hostage." The woman shook her head. "Not one person. One name. Ellison." Maya kept her eyes on the window. The ocean was a calm blue quilt far below, but her mind was not calm. She thought of her father sitting in that high Manhattan office, of how easily he could have chosen to make this a quiet, private matter. But Charles Ellison never believed in private resolutions for public wrongs. Peter Lowell walked the aisle with a certain stiffness, checking on passengers in business class. When he passed Maya, he hesitated as though wanting to say something, then continued on without a word. In the galley. Olivia Hayes braced herself against the counter. Her phone, hidden in a napkin drawer, was vibrating every few minutes. She had not opened the messages. She did not need to. She knew they were from colleagues, from friends, maybe even from strangers who had seen her name and face plastered across social media. The clip from the gate was everywhere now, paired with commentary that turned her into the embodiment of everything Aerosky was being accused of. A chime sounded. The captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently receiving updated instructions from operations. We appreciate your patience as we continue our journey. In Dallas, there was nothing patient about the operations floor." Jared Blake stood at the center of a storm of phone calls. Investors were on the line demanding explanations. Airport authorities were threatening fines for gate delays and stranded passengers. A representative from the Department of Transportation had called twice, requesting an emergency briefing. "We've got 3 other carriers pulling their shared routes with us," an analyst shouted across the room. "They don't want to be connected to this." "Which carriers?" Jared asked. "Global Sky, North Meridian, East Star. They're reassigning code shares as of tonight." Jared felt the blood drain from his face. This was no longer a fight between Aerosky and Ellison Global. It was a contagion spreading across the industry. On the ground in London, Heathrow's control center was already making adjustments. Gate schedules were being rewritten in real time to accommodate diverted and delayed flights. A senior controller glanced at the incoming list and muttered, "Flight 407 better land on time. That one's got eyes on it." Back in the sky, Maya finally reached into her satchel and retrieved her phone. She had avoided looking until now, but curiosity had a way of finding its moment. She unlocked the screen. Her messages were a flood: colleagues, friends, even distant acquaintances reaching out. Some offered support. Others asked for confirmation. A few simply wrote, "I saw you." Her thumb hovered over the call icon for her father, but she did not press it. She knew he would contact her if he needed to, and she knew that in his mind. The next move was already set, in first class. The murmurs grew bolder. One man, his voice tinged with irritation, said loudly enough for several rows to hear, "So we're all delayed. Because of some billionaire's family drama, Maya did not turn her head, but a young woman across the aisle did. If you think this is just drama, you haven't been paying attention," she said sharply. "Maybe you should ask why she was moved in the first place." The man muttered something under his breath and looked away. Olivia, still in the galley, heard the exchange. A flicker of unease passed through her. She had always been confident in her ability to manage passengers, to keep control of a cabin. But control was slipping, and she knew it. Over the ocean, the sun began its slow descent, casting a pale gold across the cabin. Shadows lengthened, and the air seemed heavier. Maya leaned back, letting the light warm her face. It reminded her of long summer evenings in her childhood home, when her father would sit on the porch, speaking softly about the difference between having power and using it. In Manhattan, Charles was on another call, this one with a board member of Aerosky who had quietly reached out. "You know you've got them cornered," the board member said. "Rourke's losing support by the hour. But if you keep the fleet frozen, we're talking billions in losses industry-wide. Regulators will step in. Charles's voice was steady. "Then they will step in knowing exactly why. And when they do, the policy changes will not be optional." In the cabin of Flight 407, Peter finally approached Maya. He leaned in, speaking quietly enough that only she could hear. "Dr. Ellison, I can't change what happened at the gate, but I want you to know, I never believed it was the right call. I didn't speak up when I should have. That's on me." Maya met his eyes. There was sincerity there, but also the guilt of someone who had stood by in silence. She nodded once. "The hardest part," she said, "is not when someone treats you badly. It's when the people who could stop it choose not to." Peter's throat tightened. He straightened, unsure what else to say, and returned to his duties. The cabin lights dimmed as the crew prepared for the evening service. The ocean outside had deepened into a steel blue, with streaks of pink and orange fading at the horizon. Somewhere far below, the first twinkle of ship lights appeared in the vast darkness. Inside, every conversation seemed to carry an undercurrent of the same question. What would happen when they landed? Maya set her phone face down on the armrest. The truth was, she already knew. Landing would not be the end of this flight. It would be the beginning of everything that came next. The cabin had grown darker, lit mostly by the dim aisle lights and the soft glow from overhead panels. Outside, night had spread across the Atlantic, the deep black broken only by the cold scatter of distant stars. Maya kept her seat reclined just enough to rest her head, eyes closed, though she was not sleeping. Every sound in the cabin was sharper in the darkness: the clink of cutlery, the muted cough of a passenger, the shuffle of a flight attendant's shoes against the carpet. It happened without warning. A man in the row ahead of her, the same one who had complained earlier, turned in his seat and addressed her directly. His voice was louder than the quiet warranted. "Tell me something," he said. "Is all this chaos really worth it? You've got flights grounded around the world, people missing weddings, funerals, work, all because you got moved to another seat." Several passengers turned their heads toward the exchange. Maya opened her eyes, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It isn't about the seat," she said evenly. "It's about why I was moved." The man scoffed. "Oh, here we go, playing the race card." The words hung in the air like a slap. A woman across the aisle inhaled sharply. Somewhere near the galley, a tray rattled as someone set it down too quickly. Maya sat up fully now, her voice calm but carrying enough for several rows to hear. "You don't have to believe me, but I've lived long enough to know when I'm being told I don't belong. And it's not a card. It's my life." The man opened his mouth to reply, but another voice cut in the young woman who had defended Maya earlier. "Maybe you should be asking why a paying passenger, who followed every rule, was told her seat was gone minutes before boarding. If it happened to you, you'd be the one speaking up." The man bristled, muttering something about not wanting to be lectured. From the galley, Olivia stepped forward. Her expression was tight, her voice edged with authority. "Oh, that's enough. Let's all focus on reaching our destination without further disturbance." Her words were meant to restore order, but the choice of phrasing "without further disturbance" only deepened the divide. Maya could feel the shift in the cabin. The passengers were no longer just curious, they were choosing sides. Captain Moreno emerged from behind the curtain separating the flight deck. She glanced around, reading the atmosphere instantly. "Everyone, please return your attention to your own seating area," she said firmly. Then she looked directly at Maya. "Dr. Ellison, may I have a moment with you?" Maya rose slowly, aware that every eye followed her as she stepped into the forward galley. The captain closed the curtain behind them. "I heard what was said," Moreno said, "and I will not tolerate disrespect toward any passenger under my command. But I also need to ask you something directly. When we land, there will be media at the gate, likely security, possibly federal agents. Do you want to address this publicly or keep moving?" Maya thought about it. If I walk past without speaking, the narrative will be written without me. If I speak, I become the story even more than I already am. Moreno nodded. "It's your choice, but whatever you decide, my crew and I will get you through that gate safely." Maya held her gaze. "I'll speak. Not because I want the attention, but because I'm tired of silence being mistaken for acceptance." When she returned to her seat, the murmurs quieted, as if the passengers sensed that something larger than an uncomfortable flight was unfolding. She sat back down, clasping her hands loosely in her lap, and let the hum of the engines fill the space between breaths. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Charles Ellison stood at the center of his office, phone pressed to his ear. Marcus Fielding's voice came through clearly. "They're expecting a statement when she lands. Rourke's team is scrambling, but their words are hollow. Too little. Too late." Charles spoke without hesitation. "Then our timing is perfect. By the time the cameras see her, the contract breach will already be filed in court. They'll know this is not just personal. It's systemic." Back on the plane, Olivia's composure was beginning to fracture. She avoided Maya's eyes entirely now, moving briskly through the aisle with the pretext of service. Her phone remained hidden, but she had seen enough to know that her career might not survive the week. Near the mid-cabin, Peter Lowell paused to speak quietly with a couple who had asked for an update. He kept his voice low, but Maya caught fragments. Words like investigation, policy, and review drifted back to her, each one heavy with the suggestion of consequence. The man in the row ahead said nothing more for the rest of the flight. He kept his eyes on the screen in front of him, though it was clear he wasn't watching. As the hours passed and the aircraft edged closer to London, the tension shifted from confrontation to anticipation. The passengers seemed to sense that whatever waited at Heathrow would be decisive. Maya leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes once more. She thought of her father's voice, steady and unshaken, and of the promise she had made to herself years ago that when the moment came, she would not shrink from it. When the captain's announcement came that they would begin their descent in 30 minutes, the energy in the cabin changed again. Passengers adjusted their seats, stowed their belongings, and glanced at the windows as though the city lights might already be visible. Maya sat up, fastening her seatbelt. She felt ready, not in the sense of eagerness, but with the calm certainty that she would meet whatever came next without apology, in the galley. Olivia stood motionless for a moment, her hands resting on the counter. The hum of the engines filled the silence. She wondered if she had just witnessed the end of her career, and if so, whether she deserved it. The landing lights came on, washing the cabin in soft illumination. The seatbelt signs chimed, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the cameras, the statements, and the consequences waited. The first jolt of the landing gear dropping shook Maya from her thoughts. It was not a hard movement, just a familiar shift in the aircraft's rhythm as it prepared for descent. Still, it made her sit straighter, eyes opening to the dark window where faint city lights began to flicker against the horizon. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have been cleared to begin our descent into London Heathrow. Weather at the airport is clear, with a temperature of 14 degrees Celsius. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. Peter Lowell walked the aisle with the quiet precision of a man who had done this thousands of times. His eyes briefly met Maya's, and he gave the smallest nod, a wordless signal of both acknowledgement and support. The cabin lights brightened slightly. Passengers shifted in their seats, closing laptops, powering down devices, and tucking loose belongings into bags. The hum of conversation was low but constant. Everyone seemed to feel it now, the sense that something significant awaited beyond the jet bridge. From her seat, Maya could see Olivia moving briskly between rows, checking belts and seat backs with the mechanical efficiency of training. But her face told a different story. Her jaw was tight, her eyes unfocused, like someone already rehearsing for a conversation they knew would not go well. The descent was smooth. The lights of London grew brighter, spreading like a net of gold across the darkness. The Thames curved through the city like a ribbon of black glass, its surface catching reflections from the bridges above. Maya rested her hands in her lap, steady. Her breathing matched the subtle vibration of the engines. She was not nervous, not in the way most people meant when they used the word. It was a different kind of alertness, the calm, before a deliberate step forward. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud. Reverse thrust roared for a moment, then softened as the plane slowed. Applause broke out in a few scattered rows, the way it sometimes did after long flights, but it died quickly, as though passengers remembered that the moment ahead would not be a normal arrival. As the aircraft taxied, the seatbelt signs remained on longer than usual. The captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, for operational reasons, we will be holding at a remote stand before disembarking. Please remain seated until the crew advises otherwise." That was unusual. It meant they were not going straight to a gate. Maya knew this without needing it explained. Remote stands were where you parked when you wanted control over who came aboard or off first. Outside her window, she saw the blue flash of airport security vehicles approaching. Behind them, a pair of unmarked vans rolled slowly along the service road. In the galley, Olivia felt her stomach twist. She had served under captains who made quick turnarounds at gates, who moved passengers with speed and discretion. This felt like containment. The plane stopped. The engines wound down, leaving the cabin in that strange half-silence of circulating air and distant ground activity. Peter made his way to Maya's row. "Dr. Ellison, the captain has requested that you disembark first." Maya rose, retrieving her satchel from under the seat. She adjusted the strap over her shoulder and smoothed the front of her jacket. Every movement was slow, deliberate. As she stepped into the forward galley, the curtain was drawn back, revealing Captain Moreno and two uniformed airport officers. One of them spoke quietly. "Dr. Ellison, the arrivals hall is crowded with press. We can route you through a secure exit if you prefer." Maya glanced at the captain. "And if I don't," Moreno's eyes softened, "then you walk out and face them. But you will not be alone." Maya thought about her father's voice that morning. She thought about the man in first class who had told her she was playing a card, and about the passengers who had watched in silence. She also thought about the young woman who had spoken up, and Peter, who had come to her quietly to admit his silence. "I will go through the main hall," she said. "I have nothing to hide." The officers exchanged a look, then nodded. One stepped aside to let her pass. When she entered the jet bridge, the air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of rain. The walk was short, but each step echoed. At the far end, the sound grew louder, the thrum of voices, the staccato clicks of camera shutters, the calls of reporters vying for position. She emerged into the glare of lights. Microphones extended toward her from every angle. The questions hit all at once. Dr. Ellison, can you comment on the grounding of Aerosky flights? Is it true your father ordered the shutdown? Were you removed from your seat because of your race? She stopped just inside the open space of the hall, lifting her chin slightly. She did not raise her voice, but the tone carried enough to quiet the closest crowd. This is not just about a seat, she said. It is about the right of every passenger to be treated with dignity, without prejudice, without bias. What happened to me happens to others every day, and most of them do not have the platform to fight it. I do, and I will. The cameras erupted again, but she did not take another question. She turned and walked toward the secure exit, the officers falling in behind her. Behind her. The noise of the press faded into the steady hum of the terminal. Ahead, a black sedan waited on the tarmac access road, engine running. In Manhattan, Charles watched the footage on a live stream. He leaned back in his chair, a slow exhale escaping. "She's ready," he murmured to himself. Inside the sedan. Maya settled into the seat, the city lights of London flashing past the tinted glass. She could still feel the weight of the questions hanging in the air, but it was no longer a burden. It was a call to act. By the time Maya reached her hotel in central London, the clip of her arrival at Heathrow had already traveled across every major news network and social platform. Her calm voice, her measured words, and the way she had stood her ground were being replayed in a continuous loop. In her room, she placed her satchel on the desk, poured herself a glass of water, and stood for a moment by the window. London's night skyline stretched beyond the glass, the London eye glowing against the dark sky, the Thames winding through the city like a vein of light. She could hear her phone buzzing on the desk behind her. Messages poured in, some from colleagues who expressed pride, others from strangers sharing their own stories of bias in travel, and a few were ugly, as she expected, filled with the kind of words that revealed just how deep prejudice could run. Across the Atlantic, in Aerosky's Manhattan headquarters, the atmosphere was unraveling. The boardroom was filled with raised voices. Thomas Rourke sat at the head of the long polished table, his face pale. On the wall screen, a live feed of news headlines was cycling Aerosky share price plummets, Aerosky operations frozen, CEO Rourke under fire. One board member leaned forward, his tone sharp. "We have 48 hours before we lose 3 of our major alliance partners. That is if they have not already finalized the paperwork. This is not a PR issue anymore. It is survival," Rourke shot back. "And what would you have me do? Apologize to Ellison Rhinestate every single grounded flight without a fight that sets a precedent we cannot undo?" An older woman at the far end of the table spoke for the first time. "The precedent has already been set. Thomas, you just do not realize you are not the one setting it anymore." In another part of the city, Marcus Fielding sat across from Charles Ellison in the quiet of the Ellison Global Conference Suite. "It is moving faster than we projected," Marcus said. 3 carriers have issued statements supporting policy reforms. 2 more have reached out privately to discuss industry-wide standards on anti-discrimination protocols. Charles nodded slowly. "Good. That means they are reading the writing on the wall. Once public sentiment locks in, they will not want to be on the wrong side of it." Back in London, Maya sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through an email from an organization she had quietly supported for years, Travelers for Equity. They wanted to feature her in their upcoming campaign. She hesitated. aware that every step she took now would ripple outward. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Captain Elise Moreno standing in the hallway, still in her crisp uniform but with a softer look on her face. "I wanted to see how you were holding up," Moreno said. "I also wanted to tell you something off the record. You made my crew think today, even the ones who would never admit it." Maya stepped aside to let her in. "That means more than you think." Moreno glanced out at the view before speaking again. "What you did, it is not just about you. It is about every passenger who has ever been made to feel they were a problem for existing in the wrong space. You held the line." Maya met her eyes. "And now the real work begins." The next morning, headlines carried a new development. Aerosky's operations remained frozen, and leaked documents showed internal memos instructing staff to handle certain passenger profiles with additional scrutiny. The phrase was vague, but the implication was clear. On live television, a panel of industry experts debated the fallout. One commentator, a former airline executive, said bluntly, "If these memos are authentic, it is not just a PR disaster, it is potential legal exposure. The Equal Access Commission will want answers." Inside Aerosky headquarters, Jared Blake, the COO, was pacing his office. He had been loyal to Rourke for years, but he could feel the shift in the air. Shareholders were calling for leadership changes, employees were leaking information to the press, and now a coalition of advocacy groups had announced a press conference to be held the following afternoon with Dr. Maya Ellison as the keynote speaker. When the call came through from Rourke, Jared almost ignored it. He answered after the third ring. "We need to contain this," Rourke said without preamble. "Get her to agree to a closed-door meeting. We settle this quietly and get the planes back in the air." Jared's voice was careful. "Thomas, with respect, I do not think she is interested in quiet. Then make her interested. Offer her whatever it takes." Jared stared out his window at the skyline. It may be too late for that. That night, Maya prepared for the press conference. She sat at the small desk in her hotel room, drafting notes. She thought of her father, of the steady way he had taught her to navigate a world that would not always welcome her. She thought of the countless faces she had seen in airports, people moving through the machinery of travel as if trying not to be noticed. And she thought of Olivia Hayes, the woman who had looked at her and decided she did not belong. Her speech was not long. It did not need to be. She knew that brevity, delivered with conviction, would carry further than any drawn-out explanation. The next morning, the conference room at the Riverfront Center was packed. Journalists filled every seat. Cameras lined the back wall, and a row of microphones stood ready at the podium. When Maya entered, the murmurs rose. But she walked steadily to the front, her notes in hand. She began without introduction. "Air travel is not a privilege for some. It is a service we all pay for. And when you pay for a service, you have the right to receive it without being judged on the color of your skin, the sound of your voice, or the name on your ticket. What happened to me is not unique. That is why we are here." She paused, letting the silence stretch. Change will not come from one airline's apology. It will come when every airline knows that the cost of discrimination is higher than the cost of fairness. The room erupted in applause. Somewhere in the crowd, a camera light blinked red, capturing her words for the millions who would watch them before the day was over. The morning after the press conference, London felt different to Maya. It was not the weather, though the sky was bright and clear, but the energy in the city. People recognized her now. On her short walk to the cafe, around the corner from her hotel, strangers offered nods of acknowledgement. A young woman stopped her at the door and said simply, Thank you. Inside, the cafe's television played a live broadcast from New York. Aerosky's board had convened an emergency meeting. The news anchor's voice was steady but laced with significance. Multiple sources confirmed that CEO Thomas Rourke is expected to resign today amid mounting shareholder pressure and public backlash. Maya stirred her tea slowly, listening. The screen showed footage of the headquarters. Reporters clustered at the entrance. Then it cut to a smaller box in the corner showing her own image from the press conference. Mouth open mid-sentence, eyes calm and direct. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her father. Watch the markets. She pulled up the live feed. Aerosky stock, which had plunged after the grounding, was rising sharply on the rumor of Rourke's resignation and the announcement of new equity and inclusion policies. The very policies Maya had insisted upon. Across the ocean, in that boardroom. Rourke sat slouched in his chair, the air heavy with defeat. Jared Blake stood at the head of the table, reading the resolution aloud. Effective immediately. The board accepts the resignation of Thomas Rourke and appoints Jared Blake as interim CEO. The company will adopt the Ellison Protocol for Passenger Equity, effective within 60 days, and will work with the Equal Access Commission to ensure compliance across all operations. The vote was unanimous. In the hallway outside, reporters swarmed. Jared delivered the prepared statement, careful to keep his voice even. Today is the first step toward restoring trust in Aerosky International. We acknowledge that we have fallen short. We are committed to rebuilding our relationship with every passenger, without exception. Back in London, Maya met with Captain Elise Moreno in the hotel lounge. Moreno looked relieved. "It is done," she said. "Rourke is out, and the policies are changing. The crew has been briefed on the investigation's findings. Olivia Hayes has been terminated." Maya felt no satisfaction in that last detail, only a quiet sense of inevitability. "It is not about punishing one person," she said. "It is about making sure this does not happen again." Moreno nodded. "That is why it will stick this time, because it is bigger than one flight." Later that afternoon, Maya attended a meeting with representatives from Travelers for Equity, the Equal Access Commission, and several airline alliances. They sat around a circular table, the city skyline glittering through the glass walls. A representative from the commission spoke first. "Dr. Ellison, your case has accelerated conversations that have stalled for years. The Ellison Protocol will not just apply to Aerosky. Several other carriers have agreed in principle to adopt it as part of an industry standard." Maya listened as they outlined the details: mandatory anti-bias training for all crew members, transparent seat reassignment policies, and a direct accountability channel for passengers who felt they had been discriminated against. When it was her turn to speak, she kept it simple. "These policies are not a favor. They are the baseline of human dignity. I hope we remember that long after the headlines fade." That evening, as she walked along the Thames, the lights reflecting off the water, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it, all the confrontation in the cabin, the faces of passengers watching in silence, the moment she stepped into the arrivals hall and chose to speak. Every step since had carried the same truth: change required both courage and persistence. In New York, Charles Ellison stood in his office, watching the city lights through the glass. Marcus Fielding entered quietly. "It is done," Marcus said. "The agreements are signed. The flights are resuming tonight." Charles smiled faintly. "Good. Now let us make sure they remember why they stopped in the first place." In the weeks that followed, the ripple effect was undeniable. Passengers began sharing their own stories of fair treatment under the new policies. Airlines that had once resisted change began adopting similar protocols, and Aerosky, once the center of controversy, began to rebuild its reputation not through glossy marketing, but through the lived experience of its passengers. For Maya, the journey returned to its quieter rhythms. She went back to her work in neuroscience, back to her lectures and research, but she also accepted speaking engagements, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because she understood that silence was no longer an option. Months later, on a transatlantic flight, she boarded first class without incident. The crew greeted her warmly, addressed her by name, and offered her a seat exactly as booked. As she settled in, she noticed a young woman across the aisle watching her with wide eyes. After takeoff, the woman leaned over. "Are you Dr. Ellison, the one from the news?" Maya smiled gently. "I am." The woman nodded. "I just wanted to say, my brother had something similar happen to him last year. He was too afraid to speak up. Seeing you stand your ground, it gave him courage." Maya's smile deepened. "That means more than you know." The rest of the flight passed in quiet comfort. When the plane landed, she stepped off into the terminal, without cameras, without noise, just the steady flow of travelers moving toward their destinations. And for the first time since that night over the Atlantic, Maya felt the shift not as tension, but as peace. The work was far from over, but the line had been drawn, and it would hold. Some say change happens slowly, that you push, you wait, and maybe the world moves an inch. But sometimes, all it takes is one person refusing to be moved at all. Maya's quiet defiance didn't just reclaim her seat, it forced an industry to face itself. Her voice became the echo for countless others, and her stand drew a line that will not be erased. And yet, behind the headlines and the billion-dollar contracts, this is still a human story. A story about the right to be treated with dignity no matter where you sit, where you come from, or the shade of your skin. Her journey reminds us to value courage as much as comfort, and to never let silence become the language of acceptance. So the next time you travel, remember someone once froze 152 flights and $2.1 billion not for revenge, but for justice. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. There are more stories ahead, and each one is a step toward the world we deserve.